The stars looked different from the bridge of the ESV Prometheus. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the main window, watching distant suns paint the darkness in colors that had no names on Earth. 200 years ago, humans could only dream of seeing such sights. Now, thanks to their alien friends, humanity sailed between worlds like ancient explorers crossed oceans. Sarah touched the crystal pendant at her throat. The Luminari had given it to her during the graduation ceremony on Luna Station. She still remembered the way the tall, glowing being had smiled at her with those kind, silver eyes. "You will carry the light of peace to dark corners of the galaxy," the Luminari had said in that musical voice that seemed to speak directly to her heart. "Humanity has such potential. We are honored to guide you on this path." That was 3 years ago. Now Sarah commanded the most advanced ship in the human fleet, equipped with Luminari light drives and Vorthak computers that could think faster than any human mind. The bridge hummed with alien technology that had lifted humanity from a single world to citizens of the galaxy. "Commander," called Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. "Incoming message from the Concordat Council on Serenity Prime." Sarah walked to the center of the bridge, her boots silent on the smooth floor made from Zephyrian crystal. The air shimmered, and suddenly she was looking at High Counselor Veltar of the Luminari. The alien's form was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly. Pure light seemed to flow beneath translucent skin, and when Veltar moved, little sparkles danced in the air around him. "Greetings, Commander Chen," Veltar said. His voice carried the warmth of a summer morning. "How goes your mission to the Outer Rim?" "Very well, High Counselor," Sarah replied, straightening her uniform. "We've established contact with 3 more species. The Cathani have agreed to join the peace accords, and the mollusk peoples are interested in cultural exchange programs." Veltar's light grew brighter, which Sarah had learned meant he was pleased. "Excellent. Your species continues to exceed our expectations. The galaxy grows more peaceful with each world you bring into the light." Behind Veltar, Sarah could see other members of the Concordat Council. There was Zukaran of the Vorthak, his massive brain visible through the clear dome of his skull, multiple eyes blinking in complex patterns that meant deep thought. Next to him stood Elder Nisase of the Zephyrians, her blue skin marked with the silver tattoos that showed her rank as a spirit guide. "The Council has new coordinates for you," Veltar continued. "There are reports of a distressed signal from the Kepler void, perhaps another species in need of our guidance." Sarah nodded. "We'll investigate immediately." "Be careful, young friend," Veltar said, and for just a moment Sarah thought she saw something flicker in his silver eyes. But then he was smiling again, and the feeling passed. The Outer Rim can hold surprises. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with her crew. She looked around the bridge at the faces of her officers, all human, all proud to serve in the Concordat fleet. They wore uniforms designed by Luminari artists, carried weapons blessed by Zephyrian priests, and used technology that Vorthak scientists had simplified so human minds could understand it. "Set course for the Kepler void," Sarah ordered. "Best speed." Dr. Marcus Webb looked up from his science station. He was older than most of the crew, one of the few humans who remembered life before the Concordat arrived. His gray hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and his brown eyes often held a distant look, as if he was thinking about things no one else could see. "Commander," he said quietly, "I'm picking up some odd readings from that sector." Sarah walked over to his station. The screen showed star charts and energy signatures that meant nothing to her. She had learned to read Luminari displays, but the science station used Vorthak symbols that twisted her mind if she looked at them too long. "What kind of readings?" she asked. Webb frowned, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "I'm not sure. There's a lot of background energy out there, more than there should be for an empty region of space." "Maybe it's natural," suggested Navigator Kim from her station near the front of the bridge. "Solar activity, gravitational waves, that sort of thing." Webb shook his head. "This looks artificial, controlled, like someone is running massive power systems out there." Sarah felt a small chill run down her spine, but she pushed it away. The Concordat had taught humanity that the galaxy was full of wonders they didn't understand yet. There were ancient races who had built incredible things, peaceful civilizations that used energy in ways humans couldn't imagine. "We'll investigate when we get there," Sarah decided. "For now, let's focus on the distress signal." The journey to the Kepler void took 2 days at light speed. Sarah spent the time reading reports from other human ships scattered across the galaxy. Captain Rodriguez had successfully negotiated a trade agreement with the crystal farmers of Rigel 7. Commander, Park had helped settle a border dispute between two species who couldn't even breathe the same atmosphere. Lieutenant Commander Hassan had discovered a new form of art on a world where the inhabitants painted with liquid light. Everywhere humans went, they brought peace. It made Sarah proud to be human, proud to be part of something bigger than just one world. But as they approached the Kepler void, Webb's readings got stranger. "Commander," he called from his station, "you need to see this." Sarah joined him at the science console. The screens showed a three-dimensional map of the local region. Most of it was empty space, marked with the gentle blue glow that meant normal vacuum. But in several spots there were angry red blotches. "What am I looking at?" Sarah asked. "Energy signatures," Webb explained. "Massive ones. Something out there is using more power than most star systems produce. Could it be the distress ship?" Webb shook his head. "The distress signal is coming from here." He pointed to a small yellow dot. "But these energy readings are spread across thousands of cubic kilometers." "This isn't one ship, Commander. This is industrial activity on a scale I've never seen." Sarah stared at the display. The red blotches looked like wounds in space itself. "Are there any records of activity in this region?" "That's what's strange," Webb said. "According to the Concord databases, this entire sector has been empty for over 1,000 years. No intelligent life, no industrial activity, nothing. Maybe the databases are wrong," Kim suggested from her station. "Or maybe someone just moved in recently." But Webb was shaking his head again. "Commander, some of these energy signatures have been running for centuries. The radiation decay patterns don't lie. Whatever's out there has been active for a very long time." Sarah felt that chill again, stronger this time. Could the Concordat have missed something? The bridge went quiet. It wasn't a question anyone was comfortable thinking about. The Concordat had been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years before humans even invented the wheel. Their knowledge was vast beyond human understanding. The idea that they could have missed something so large seemed impossible. "Let's stick to the mission," Sarah decided. "We investigate the distress signal first. If we find something unusual, we'll report it to the Concordat." But as the Prometheus dropped out of light speed near the source of the signal, Sarah began to understand that unusual was not a strong enough word. The distressed ship hung in space like a broken bird. It was unlike anything in the Concordat databases. The hull was made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Strange symbols covered its surface, carved deep into the metal as if someone had clawed them there. "No response to our hails," reported Torres from communications. "The ship appears to be powered down, but I'm detecting life signs." "How many?" Sarah asked, hard to tell. "The hull is interfering with our scanners. Maybe a dozen individuals." Sarah looked at the alien ship and felt something twist in her stomach. It looked wrong somehow, like a disease in the clean emptiness of space. "Prepare a boarding party," she ordered. "Full environmental suits. We don't know what atmosphere they breathe." An hour later, Sarah found herself floating through the airlocks of the alien vessel. Her suit lights cut through darkness that seemed almost solid. The walls were covered in more of those strange symbols, and the air was filled with a low humming that she could feel in her bones. "This way," said Sergeant Miller, the team's security chief. His voice crackled through the comm system. "Life signs are coming from the forward section." They moved through corridors that were too narrow and too low, designed for beings smaller than humans. The humming got louder as they went deeper into the ship, and Sarah began to hear something else underneath it. A sound like whispering, too quiet to understand but too persistent to ignore. "Commander," Webb's voice came through her earpiece. "I'm getting some very strange readings from your location. The energy patterns inside that ship don't match anything in our databases." "Strange how?" Sarah asked, pausing at a junction where 3 corridors met. "The energy is organic," Webb said. "It's not coming from machines. It's coming from living tissue." Sarah felt her heart start to beat faster. "What do you mean, living tissue?" "I mean the entire ship appears to be partially alive," Webb replied. "The hull, the corridors, even the atmosphere recycling systems. They're all showing biological activity." Before Sarah could respond, Miller's voice cut through the comm system. "Commander, you need to see this." She followed Miller's lights to a large chamber near the front of the ship. Her suit lights revealed a scene that made her step backward in shock. The chamber was filled with cells, Not prison cells, but organic pods that pulsed with their own internal light. Inside each pod was a being Sarah didn't recognize. They looked humanoid but wrong, as if someone had taken the idea of a person and twisted it into something else. Their skin was gray and stretched tight over bones that were too sharp. Their eyes were closed, but Sarah could see them moving behind their eyelids as if they were dreaming. "My God," whispered Miller. "What are they?" Webb's voice crackled through the comm again. "Commander, I'm reading massive energy buildup around your position. Something is powering up." As if responding to his words, the pods began to glow brighter. The humming sound grew louder, and Sarah realized it wasn't mechanical at all. It was voices. All the beings in the pods were singing the same note over and over, like a prayer or a warning. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, backing toward the corridor. But as she turned to leave, one of the pods cracked open with a sound like breaking bone. Fluid spilled onto the floor, and the being inside opened its eyes. Sarah found herself looking into depths that seemed to go on forever. The being's mouth opened, and when it spoke, its voice was like the whisper of wind through empty spaces. "You," it said, and Sarah realized it was speaking perfect English. "You wear their chains willingly. Soon you will join us in the darkness beneath their light." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "What are you talking about?" The being tried to sit up, but the effort seemed to exhaust it. "The Concord," it whispered. "The beautiful ones who bring peace to the galaxy. Do you know what they really are?" "They're our allies," Sarah said. But even as she spoke the words, she felt doubt creeping into her voice. The being laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Allies, yes, that's what they told my people too. Right up until the harvest began." "Commander," Webb's voice was urgent now. "I'm reading multiple contacts approaching your position. They're moving fast." Sarah looked at the dying being in the pod. "What harvest?" But the being's eyes were already growing dim. "Ask them," it whispered. "Ask your beautiful friends what happened to the Krillian Empire. Ask them where my people went." The being went still, and the light faded from its eyes. Sarah stood in the alien ship, surrounded by pods full of creatures she didn't recognize, listening to her science officer report contacts that weren't supposed to exist. And for the first time in her career, she began to wonder if humanity really understood the galaxy they had been so eager to join. The whispers in the walls grew louder, and Sarah realized they weren't random sounds. They were words repeated over and over in languages she didn't recognize. But somehow she understood their meaning. They were warnings. Sarah stood in her ready room, staring at the datapad in her hands. 3 weeks had passed since the incident in the Kepler void, and she still couldn't make sense of what they had found. The Concordate's response had been swift and reassuring, as always. A sad remnant of the Krillian civil wars, High Counselor Veltar had explained during their debriefing. His silver eyes had been filled with what looked like genuine sorrow. The Krillians destroyed themselves in brutal conflict centuries ago. What you found was likely a prison ship from that era, carrying war criminals who had been sentenced to exile. The explanation made perfect sense. It fit with everything the Concordate had taught humanity about the galaxy's history. Civilizations rose and fell. Some destroyed themselves through war and hatred, others found peace and wisdom. The Concordate existed to help species avoid the mistakes that had doomed races like the Krillians. But the words of the dying being haunted Sarah's dreams. "Ask them where my people went." She set down the datapad and walked to the window of her ready room. Outside, the Prometheus drifted in orbit around Harmony Station, one of the Concordate's diplomatic outposts in the Outer Rim. The station was beautiful, built from luminary crystal that caught and amplified starlight until the entire structure glowed like a captured star. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Dr. Webb entered, carrying a tablet and wearing the same worried expression he'd had for weeks. "Commander, I've been analyzing the data from the Krillian ship." "And?" Sarah gestured for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. Webb hesitated, then set his tablet on the desk between them. "The energy signatures don't match the Concordate's explanation." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean the ship wasn't old, Commander. The hull degradation patterns, the power system decay, the biological components. Everything I can measure suggests that ship was active within the last few years, not centuries." Sarah felt a familiar chill. "That's impossible. The Concordate databases clearly show the Krillian Empire fell 300 years ago." "I know what the databases say," Webb replied, "but the physical evidence disagrees. And there's something else. He activated his tablet and a three-dimensional star map appeared above Sarah's desk. Red dots marked several locations in the outer rim. "I've been monitoring communications traffic in this sector," Webb explained. "There are gaps, Commander. Entire regions where no signals come out, but massive energy usage suggests industrial activity." Sarah studied the map. "Could be natural phenomena, nebulae, radiation fields, that sort of thing." "That's what I thought at first. But look at this." Webb manipulated the display and the red zones shifted to show their borders. "These zones are expanding, slowly but consistently, and they're all moving toward inhabited systems." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" Webb met her eyes. "I think something is out there, Commander. Something the Concordat either doesn't know about or doesn't want us to know about." Before Sarah could respond, her communicator chirped. "Commander Chen to the bridge. Priority message from Concordat Command." Sarah and Webb exchanged glances, then made their way to the bridge. The view screen showed the familiar form of Zukaran of the Vorthak. The alien's massive brain pulsed with different colors as he spoke, which usually meant he was processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. "Commander Chen," Zukaran said in his precise mechanical voice, "the Concordat has a special mission for you. There are reports of illegal mining operations in the Gehenna system, pirates most likely, stealing resources that should belong to all civilized peoples." Sarah nodded. "We can investigate immediately." "Excellent. But be cautious, Commander. These criminals may be desperate. Take whatever actions are necessary to restore peace to the region." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah staring at the blank screen. Something about the way Zukaran had said whatever actions are necessary bothered her, but she couldn't put her finger on why. "Set course for the Gehenna system," she ordered. Best speed. The journey took 4 days. As they approached the outer planets of the system, Webb's readings became increasingly strange. "Commander," he called from his science station, "I'm detecting large-scale mining operations on several asteroids, but the energy signatures are all wrong." "Wrong how?" Sarah asked, joining him at his console. "They're too efficient. The power-to-extraction ratio is beyond anything I've seen, even with Concordat technology. And there's something else." He pointed to a cluster of readings on his screen. "Those aren't mining ships, Commander. They're organic signatures, living beings." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "How many?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Sarah looked at the readings, remembering the pods on the Krillian ship. "Are they in distress?" Webb's face went pale. "Commander, they're showing signs of extreme physiological stress. Exhaustion, malnutrition, cellular damage consistent with forced labor." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data. When she spoke, her voice was steady but cold. "Take us in for a closer look. But keep us hidden." The Prometheus used its luminary stealth systems to approach the mining operation undetected. What they found made Sarah's blood turn to ice. The asteroids had been carved out into vast mining pits. Thousands of beings worked in the airless environment, their bodies enclosed in crude life support systems that looked more like torture devices than protective equipment. They moved slowly, painfully, extracting rare minerals with tools that sparked and smoked in the thin atmosphere. "My God," whispered Navigator Kim. "What species are they?" Webb ran his scanners over the mining sites. "Multiple species, Commander. I'm reading Vex Krillian, something called Nali, and several others I can't identify." Sarah stared at the view screen in horror. "The Vex are supposed to be extinct. The Concordat databases say they died out in a plague 2 centuries ago." "Well, they're not extinct now," Webb said grimly. "And neither are the Krillians, apparently." As they watched, a group of sleek ships approached the mining sites. Sarah recognized the design immediately. They were luminary vessels, their hulls glowing with the same gentle light she had always associated with peace and wisdom. "Incoming transmission," reported Torres from communications. Sarah straightened her uniform. On screen. The view screen filled with the familiar form of a luminary captain. Unlike the High Counselors, this one's light was harsher, more focused. When he spoke, his voice lacked the musical warmth Sarah was used to. "Human vessel," the luminary said. "You are in a restricted area. Depart immediately." Sarah stood straighter. "This is Commander Chen of the Concordat vessel Prometheus. We're responding to reports of illegal mining operations." The luminary's light flickered in what Sarah had learned was the equivalent of a frown. There are no illegal operations here. These are rehabilitation facilities for criminals and dissidents. Sarah looked at the view screen, where thousands of beings continued their backbreaking labor, in conditions that would kill most humans in minutes. Rehabilitation? Yes, the Luminari replied. These individuals violated Concordat law. They are working to repay their debt to society. What crimes did they commit? Sarah asked. The Luminari's pause was just a fraction too long. Various offenses. Theft, assault, sedition against lawful authority. The details are classified. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. All of them? Thousands of beings, all criminals? The galaxy is full of those who resist peace and order, the Luminari said. The Concordat exists to guide them toward better choices. Sarah looked at the mining sites again. She could see beings collapsing from exhaustion, others dragging their wounded companions away from dangerous equipment. It looked less like rehabilitation and more like the slow murder of entire populations. I'd like to speak with some of the prisoners, Sarah said. Standard diplomatic protocol. The Luminari's light flared brighter. That will not be possible. These beings are dangerous. Contact with them could spread seditious ideas to your crew. Nevertheless, I insist. As a member of the Concordat, Earth has the right to observe rehabilitation procedures. For a moment, Sarah thought the Luminari might refuse entirely, but then his light dimmed to a more normal level. Very well. You may speak with one prisoner, under supervision. But I warn you, Commander, these beings are skilled liars. They will tell you anything to gain your sympathy. An hour later, Sarah found herself in the sterile confines of a Luminari transport, approaching one of the asteroid facilities. The Luminari captain, who had introduced himself as Velnari, sat across from her with two guards who looked more like soldiers than peacekeepers. The facility's interior was a maze of carved tunnels filled with the sound of mining equipment and the cries of exhausted workers. The air was thick with dust and the smell of fear. Sarah had to fight to keep her expression neutral as they passed cells full of beings who looked more like skeletons than living creatures. Here, Velnari announced, stopping at a cell near the center of the facility. This one speaks your language. The cell contained a single being that Sarah almost recognized. It was humanoid, with the same basic body structure as the creature she had found on the Krillian ship. But this one was still alive, though barely. Its gray skin was stretched over bones that showed clearly through too thin flesh, and its eyes held a depth of exhaustion that made Sarah want to look away. You are the human, the being said in accented English. Its voice was like sand scraping against stone. Yes, Sarah replied. What's your name? I was called Thekvar of the Vex Exploration Corps. The being tried to stand straighter but failed. Before your friends decided my people needed to learn better ways. Velnari's light flashed. This one was a military commander who refused to accept Concordat authority. He led raids against peaceful settlements. Thekvar laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Peaceful settlements. Is that what you call the processing centers? What processing centers? Sarah asked. But Velnari stepped forward before Thekvar could answer. Enough, this creature spreads lies and discord. We should return to your ship. Sarah ignored him. What processing centers? She asked again. Thekvar looked at her with those deep, exhausted eyes. The places where they take the children first. Where they prepare them for the harvest. What harvest? Sarah demanded, but Velnari was already calling for the guards. This interview is over, the Luminari announced. The prisoner is clearly delusional. But as the guards moved to escort Sarah away, Thekvar spoke one more time. Ask them what happened to the colonies on Kepler Prime, he whispered. Ask them why 16 billion Vex simply vanished one day. Ask them why our children's schools are now empty buildings full of dust and silence. Sarah was pulled away before she could ask more questions, but Thekvar's words followed her out of the facility and back to her ship. That night, she sat in her ready room with Webb, searching through Concordat databases for any mention of Kepler Prime. Here, Webb said, pointing to an entry on his screen. Kepler Prime, former Vex colony world. Status abandoned due to economic collapse. Population, 0. Last update 2 years ago. Sarah stared at the entry. 16 billion beings don't just disappear because of economic problems. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Commander, what if the Concordat isn't what we think it is? Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about pods full of dying beings, Mining facilities full of slaves and colonies that had lost their entire populations. For the first time since humanity had met the Concordat, she wondered if the galaxy's greatest champions of peace might be something else entirely. Something much darker. The decision to go rogue wasn't made lightly. Sarah Chen stood in the cargo bay of the Prometheus, looking at the faces of her crew. She had called them together to tell them the truth, all of it. What they had found in the Kepler void, what they had seen at the mining facilities, what the databases didn't say about vanished civilizations. "I won't order any of you to come with me," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the large space. "What I'm proposing is treason against the Concordat. If we're caught, we'll likely end up in those mining facilities ourselves." Sergeant Miller was the first to speak. "Where are we going, Commander?" Sarah activated a holographic display that showed the galactic core. The center of the galaxy glowed with ancient stars and swirling energy fields that made sensors useless beyond a certain distance. "The Forbidden Zones," Sarah replied. "The areas the Concordat claims are too dangerous for exploration. If there are answers to be found, they'll be there." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his tablet in hand. "I've been analyzing the energy signatures from the outer rim facilities. They all point toward the core. Whatever the Concordat is really doing, the heart of it is in the Forbidden Zones." Navigator Kim looked nervous. "Commander, the Concordat has good reasons for keeping those areas off limits. Radiation storms, gravitational anomalies, hostile environments that can kill a ship in seconds." "Maybe," Sarah replied. "Or maybe they just don't want anyone to see what's really there." The crew was quiet for a moment. Sarah could see the doubt in their faces, the fear of challenging everything they had believed about the galaxy. But she could also see something else, anger, horror at what they had witnessed. The same feelings that were driving her to risk everything for the truth. "I'm in," said Chief Engineer Rodriguez from the back of the group. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the old days before the Concordat came. She always said something wasn't right about beings who smiled too much and promised too much." One by one, the rest of the crew voiced their agreement. They were all volunteers now, all willing to risk their lives to learn what lay beneath the Concordat's beautiful facade. The journey to the galactic core took 2 weeks, using stealth systems and routes that avoided Concordat patrol zones. As they traveled deeper into space that human maps marked as empty, Webb's readings became increasingly disturbing. "Commander," he called from his science station as they approached the outer edge of the Forbidden Zone, "I'm reading massive energy signatures ahead. Industrial activity on a scale that defies description." Sarah joined him at his console, looking at readings that made her mind reel. "How massive?" "Each facility appears to be processing power equivalent to the entire output of a small star," Webb replied, his voice tight with disbelief. "And there are hundreds of them." The Prometheus crept forward, using every stealth technology they had. What they found when they reached the first facility made Sarah's blood turn to ice. The structure was enormous, larger than any space station humanity had ever built. It hung in space like a vast metal flower, with dozens of arms reaching out to capture and process something that Sarah couldn't immediately identify. But as they got closer, the truth became horribly clear. "Those aren't materials being processed," Webb whispered. "Those are ships. Thousands of ships." Sarah stared at the view screen in horror. The facility's arms were indeed capturing ships, but not empty vessels. These were colony ships, passenger transports, entire refugee fleets. She could see beings moving inside the ships as they were drawn toward the facility's processing centers. "What are they doing to them?" she asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Webb ran every scan he could without giving away their position. When he looked up from his console, his face was pale as death. "Commander, they're extracting something from the ships. Not resources, not technology. They're extracting the life forms themselves." "For what purpose?" Webb's hand shook as he adjusted his controls. "I don't know. But whatever they're taking, it's being concentrated and stored in those central chambers." He pointed to the heart of the facility, where massive spheres pulsed with sickly light. "And, Commander, the energy readings from those chambers aren't mechanical. They're biological. They're alive." Sarah felt the world spin around her. "Alive how?" "The energy patterns match neural activity, consciousness. Commander, I think they're harvesting minds." Before Sarah could respond, Torres called out from the communications station. "Commander, I'm picking up transmissions from inside the facility. They're in multiple languages, but the translation matrix is working. Put it through the speakers, Sarah ordered. The bridge filled with sounds that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. Voices crying out in fear and confusion. Beings calling for their children. Prayers in languages she didn't recognize, and underneath it all, a horrible sucking sound like something essential being drained away. "Turn it off," Sarah whispered. But the damage was done. Her crew had heard the truth about what the Concordat really was. "There are more facilities ahead," Webb reported, his voice hollow. "Dozens of them. All processing ships from different sectors of the galaxy." Sarah forced herself to think past the horror. "Can you identify where the ships are coming from?" Webb worked at his console for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "All over the Outer Rim, Commander. These are refugee fleets from the systems that have gone dark over the past few years. The ones the Concordat databases claim were abandoned or destroyed by natural disasters." They weren't abandoned, Sarah realized. They were evacuated. The populations were loaded onto ships and brought here. "For processing," Webb added quietly. Sarah looked at the massive facility on the view screen, then at the readings showing dozens more in the distance. "How many beings are we talking about?" Webb's calculations took a few minutes. When he finished, his voice was barely audible. "Based on the ship sizes and the processing rates, I estimate several billion individuals have been brought through these facilities in the past decade alone." The bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Sarah felt like she was drowning in the magnitude of what they had discovered. The Concordat wasn't just enslaving civilizations. They were systematically harvesting entire species, draining something essential from billions of minds and storing it for some unthinkable purpose. "Commander," Torres called from her station. "I'm detecting movement from the facility. Multiple ships launching." Sarah's blood went cold. "Have they spotted us?" "Negative, Commander. The ships are heading away from us toward the Galactic Rim." "But Commander, these aren't Concordat vessels." Sarah looked at the tactical display. The ships were massive, larger than anything in the human fleet, and they moved with purpose toward inhabited sectors of the galaxy. "They're collection ships," she realized. "They're going out to bring back more refugees." Webb was tracking their courses on his console. "Commander, if these ships maintain their current headings, they'll reach human space within 6 months." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Humanity was next. All the guidance, all the gifts, all the promises of peace and prosperity had been preparation for this moment. Earth's 8 billion minds were about to be added to whatever horrible collection the Concordat was building in the galactic core. "We need to get closer," Sarah decided. "We need to understand what they're really doing with all these minds." The Prometheus crept deeper into the facility network, using asteroid fields and radiation clouds for cover. What they found at the center of the complex defied human understanding. It was a sphere the size of a small moon, covered in a network of glowing conduits that pulsed with the stolen consciousness of entire civilizations. The energy readings from the sphere were beyond anything Webb had ever recorded. But more disturbing than its size or power was what surrounded it. "Commander," Webb whispered, "the sphere isn't alone." Sarah looked at the long-range scanners and saw the truth. There were other spheres, dozens of them scattered throughout the galactic core. Each one glowed with the same horrible light, each one fed by networks of processing facilities that stretched across thousands of light years. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. Webb ran calculations based on the energy decay patterns and the age of the facilities. "Based on the infrastructure, I'd estimate thousands of years, Commander. Maybe tens of thousands. The Concordat has been systematically harvesting civilizations since before humans learned to use fire." Sarah stared at the spheres on the view screen, each one representing the stolen essence of countless species. The beautiful, wise Concordat that humanity had been so grateful to meet wasn't an alliance of enlightened beings. It was a collection system designed to identify, cultivate, and harvest intelligent life across the entire galaxy. "What are they using all this consciousness for?" she wondered aloud. As if in answer to her question, one of the spheres began to pulse more brightly. The conduits connecting it to the processing facilities glowed with increased activity, and something began to emerge from the sphere's surface. It was a ship, but unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It was organic in design, grown rather than built, and it radiated power that made the Prometheus's systems scream warnings about dangerous energy levels. As the ship cleared the sphere, it began to change, shifting and adapting its form like a living thing. "Commander," Webb's voice was tight with fear. "That ship is heading for the outer galaxy, and its energy signature matches the readings we got from the Luminary High Council." Sarah felt the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place. The beautiful, glowing beings that humanity worshipped as saviors weren't aliens at all. They were constructs, vessels created from the harvested consciousness of entire civilizations and given form to interact with new species. The real Concordat wasn't the wise teachers humanity had met. It was something ancient and hungry that fed on the minds of intelligent beings, using their stolen consciousness to create the perfect predators. Beings beautiful enough to inspire trust, wise enough to guide civilizations to greater heights, and patient enough to spend centuries preparing each species for harvest. "We have to warn Earth," Sarah said. But even as she spoke the words, she knew it was already too late. Webb was monitoring long-range communications. "Commander, I'm picking up broadcasts from human space. The Concordat has announced a new phase in humanity's integration into galactic society. They're offering to relocate human populations to paradise worlds, where they can live in perfect harmony." Sarah closed her eyes, seeing in her mind the massive collection ships that were already heading toward human space. They're starting the harvest. The Prometheus hung in space at the edge of the most horrible truth in galactic history. Around them, the processing facilities continued their work, draining the last essence from civilizations that had trusted the beautiful strangers who promised them peace. And somewhere in the distance, Earth waited unknowingly for its turn to feed the hunger of things that wore the faces of angels, but carried the souls of demons. For the first time since becoming a starship captain, Sarah Chen felt truly helpless. They had found the truth, but the truth was so vast and horrible that she didn't know how any force in the galaxy could stand against it. But as she looked at her crew, she saw something that gave her the first spark of hope she had felt in weeks. They were angry, not just afraid or shocked, but genuinely, deeply angry at what had been done to countless billions of beings across the galaxy. And Sarah was beginning to realize that anger might be the one thing the Concordat had never learned to harvest. The first human colony ship arrived at what the Concordat called Paradise 7 on a Tuesday morning that should have been like any other. Sarah Chen watched from the hidden sensors aboard the Prometheus as the massive transport settled onto the landing pad with mechanical precision. 30,000 human colonists stepped out into artificial sunshine, breathing air that smelled like flowers and listening to music that seemed to come from the very ground beneath their feet. They looked happy, excited, ready to start new lives in a galaxy that had promised them everything. Sarah wanted to scream. "Commander?" Dr. Webb called from his science station, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "The processing facilities are already adapting for human physiology." Sarah looked at the readings Webb displayed on the main screen. Deep beneath Paradise 7's beautiful surface, machinery was shifting and changing, preparing chambers designed specifically for human minds. The Concordat had studied their new subjects well. "How long do they have?" Sarah asked. Webb ran calculations on his tablet. Based on the patterns from other species, the Concordat usually allows a settling-in period of several weeks. "Let the subjects feel safe and secure before beginning the harvest." Sarah nodded grimly. It was exactly what she had expected. The Concordat's methods were always the same. Make the victims grateful right up until the moment their consciousness was stripped away and fed to the ancient hunger at the galaxy's heart. But this time would be different. This time the Concordat was dealing with humans. "Signal the resistance cells," Sarah ordered. "Tell them it's time." Over the past 3 months, while the Concordat had been preparing for humanity's harvest, Sarah and her crew had been preparing too. They had spread the truth to every human ship captain they could trust, every colony administrator who would listen, every military officer who had started to notice the gaps in the Concordat's perfect story. The response had been everything Sarah could have hoped for and more. Humans, it turned out, did not react well to being told they were livestock. Captain Rodriguez had been the first to respond to Sarah's coded messages. His ship, the Buenos Aires, had been escorting a colony transport when Sarah's transmission reached him. Instead of delivering his charges to their assigned paradise world, Rodriguez had taken them to a hidden base in the asteroid belt of an uninhabited system. Commander Park had done the same with her transport fleet. Then Lieutenant Commander Hassan. Within weeks, a network of human ships had gone dark. taking their passengers to safety while leaving the Concordat wondering where their carefully planned harvest had gone. But simply hiding wasn't enough. The Concordat had been harvesting civilizations for thousands of years. They had resources, technology, and patience that humanity couldn't match. The only way to stop them was to attack the problem at its source, which was why Sarah Chen was about to do something that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. "Dr. Webb," she said, turning to her science officer, "are the volunteers ready?" Webb nodded, though his expression was grim. "They understand the risks, Commander. They know they might not come back." Sarah looked at the list of names on her datapad. 53 humans from across the fleet had volunteered for what they were calling the infiltration protocol. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, teachers, even a few children who had insisted they wanted to help save their species. What they were planning to do had never been tried before, because no other species had ever been insane enough to attempt it. They were going to let themselves be harvested. The plan had come from an unexpected source: the dying Krillian they had found in the Kepler void. His final words had contained more than just warnings. They had contained technical specifications for the harvesting process, details about how consciousness was extracted and stored, and most importantly, information about where the harvested minds went. "The spheres aren't just storage devices," Webb had explained during their planning sessions. "They're processing centers. The harvested consciousness is broken down, analyzed, and distributed to create the constructs we know as the Concordat leadership." It was a horrible revelation, but it also presented an opportunity. If human consciousness could be harvested and fed into the spheres, then human consciousness could potentially influence the system from within. The question was whether human minds could survive the process long enough to make a difference. "Remember," Sarah told the volunteers as they prepared for transport to Paradise 7, "you're not trying to destroy the system immediately. You're trying to corrupt it, introduce chaos, doubt, questions that the constructs can't answer. Make them uncertain." The volunteers nodded. They all carried the same expression: determination mixed with the kind of reckless courage that had gotten humans into trouble throughout their history. Today, Sarah hoped that reckless courage might save not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy. The infiltration began 3 weeks later, when the Concordat started the harvest on Paradise 7. Sarah watched from her hidden position as the beautiful luminary constructs emerged from their ships, moving among the human colonists with gentle smiles and reassuring words. They spoke of a final gift, a chance to join with the infinite wisdom of the galaxy, to become part of something greater than any individual could achieve alone. The colonists went willingly. Of course they did. The Concordat had spent 2 centuries conditioning humanity to trust them, to see them as wise guides leading mankind to a better future. But scattered among the innocent colonists were Sarah's volunteers, and they carried something the Concordat had never encountered before: deliberate, weaponized defiance. The first sign that something was wrong came from the processing facility itself. "Commander," Webb reported, his voice filled with excitement and terror in equal measure, "the harvesting chambers are showing irregular activity." Sarah looked at the readings Webb displayed. The smooth, efficient process that had claimed billions of minds over the millennia was stuttering. Power fluctuations rippled through the facility as the harvesting machinery struggled to process minds that refused to be broken down quietly. "What's happening?" Sarah asked. Webb was monitoring multiple data streams simultaneously, his hands dancing across his controls. "The human volunteers aren't just being harvested, Commander. They're fighting back from inside the system. They're introducing contradictions, paradoxes, emotional responses that the processing matrix can't handle." On Paradise 7's surface, the luminary constructs had stopped moving. They stood frozen among the colonists, their beautiful faces showing the first expressions of uncertainty Sarah had ever seen from a Concordat being. "The constructs are being affected," Webb continued. "The chaotic input from the human volunteers is propagating through the network. The constructs are starting to experience doubt, fear, anger, emotions they were never designed to process." Sarah felt her heart racing. It was working. The plan was actually working, but then the screens filled with new readings, and Sarah's hope turned to horror. "Commander," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the primary spheres at the galactic core are responding. They're sending massive amounts of energy toward this facility." Sarah watched as power levels throughout the processing network began to spike. The ancient intelligences that controlled the Concordat weren't going to let a few rebellious human minds disrupt thousands of years of careful harvesting. They're trying to purge the human consciousness from the system, she realized. Webb nodded grimly. If they succeed, our volunteers will be completely destroyed. Not just killed, but erased. Their consciousness will be scattered to quantum fragments. Sarah looked at the readings, watching as the battle raged inside humanity's most advanced processing networks. Her volunteers were fighting for their very existence against forces that had consumed entire galaxies' worth of intelligence. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. Commander, Webb's voice was filled with awe. The human volunteers aren't just surviving the purge attempt. They're adapting to it. They're learning how to exist within the processing matrix and turning the Concordat's own systems against them. On the view screen, Sarah could see the results. The luminary constructs on Paradise 7 were no longer beautiful beings of light. They were flickering, changing, their perfect forms becoming unstable as conflicting thoughts and emotions tore through their artificial minds. Some of them began to scream. It was a sound unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. The perfect, musical voices of the luminary constructs became harsh and discordant as they experienced fear, rage, and despair for the first time in their existence. The corruption is spreading, Webb reported. The human consciousness is propagating through the entire Concordat network. Every construct, every processing facility, every sphere is being affected. Sarah watched readings from across the galaxy as the infection of human stubbornness spread like wildfire. Concordat facilities that had operated for millennia suddenly began showing erratic behavior. Collection ships stopped mid-journey as their crews struggled with newly awakened emotions. Processing centers shut down as their operators questioned the morality of what they were doing. But the most dramatic changes were happening to the spheres at the galactic core. Commander, Webb said, his voice tight with disbelief. The spheres are changing. The harvested consciousness stored inside them is being affected by the human input. Billions of minds that were dormant are suddenly becoming active again. Sarah stared at the long-range readings. The spheres that had been the Concordat's greatest weapons were becoming something else entirely. The stolen consciousness of countless species was waking up, remembering who they had been before the harvest, and they were angry, very angry. The Concordat is losing control, Sarah realized. The network they built to harvest civilizations is turning into a resurrection system. Across the galaxy, dead civilizations began to remember themselves. Krillian military commanders, who had been processed centuries ago, suddenly found their consciousness restored and began issuing orders to liberate their people. Vex explorers who had been harvested decades ago started plotting escape routes from facilities they had been forced to build. Nali artists who had become raw material for Concordat constructs began creating works of beauty that the processing systems couldn't understand or contain. And at the center of it all, 53 human volunteers who had willingly walked into hell were orchestrating the greatest prison break in galactic history. Status of the volunteers? Sarah asked. Webb checked his readings. Still active, Commander. Still fighting, but they're not the same as when they went in. The processing system has changed them just like they've changed it. Changed how? Webb hesitated. I'm not entirely sure. But they're not just human consciousness anymore. They've absorbed aspects of every species that was ever harvested. They're becoming something new, something the galaxy has never seen before. Sarah nodded. She had expected this might happen. Humans had always been adaptable, always willing to become something more than they were if the situation demanded it. If her volunteers had to become part Krillian, part Vex, part Nali to save the galaxy, then that's what they would do. Signal all human ships, she ordered. Tell them the first phase is complete. It's time for phase 2. Across human space, ships that had been hiding in the darkness for months suddenly began broadcasting on every frequency. The truth about the Concordat flooded the communication networks, the harvesting facilities, the processing spheres, the systematic murder of entire civilizations disguised as benevolent guidance. But more importantly, they broadcast something else. Hope. The Concordat could be beaten. Their perfect system could be corrupted. Their ancient hunger could be turned against them, and humanity had just proven it. Sarah looked out at the stars, knowing that the galaxy would never be the same. The Concordate's carefully maintained order was crumbling, replaced by something chaotic and unpredictable and gloriously alive. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy was free to choose its own destiny, and it had 53 humans to thank for it. The war for the galaxy's soul began not with weapons or fleets, but with a question that echoed across every communication channel in known space. What does it mean to be alive? The question came from the processing spheres at the galactic core, where billions of harvested minds were suddenly remembering what they had been before the Concordate consumed them. It came from luminary constructs who had spent centuries believing they were perfect beings of light, only to discover they were made from the stolen essence of murdered civilizations. It came from Vorthak administrators whose massive brains were struggling to process emotions they had never been designed to feel. Most of all, it came from the 53 human volunteers who had walked willingly into the heart of darkness and emerged as something entirely new. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching reports flood in from across the galaxy. The Concordate's perfect order was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. But the chaos that was replacing it wasn't the kind of destructive anarchy Sarah had feared. It was something else entirely. It was revolution. "Commander," Dr. Webb called from his science station, his voice filled with wonder. "I'm receiving direct communication from the galactic core. It's coming from the volunteers." Sarah felt her heart race. "Put them through." The view screen flickered and filled with an image that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The figure that appeared looked human at first glance, but as Sarah watched, she could see other elements layered beneath the familiar form. The proud bearing of a Krillian warrior, the deep thoughtfulness of a Vorthak scientist, the spiritual serenity of a Zephyrian mystic. It was Lieutenant Harrison, one of the volunteers, but he had become something more than human. "Commander Chen," Harrison said, and his voice carried harmonics from dozens of different species. "We need to talk. Are you all right?" Sarah asked, though she realized the question was probably meaningless now. Harrison smiled, and Sarah could see sadness and joy and determination all mixed together in his expression. "We're alive, Commander. More alive than we've ever been. We're everything that ever lived in this galaxy, and we remember it all." Webb leaned forward at his station. "Lieutenant, what's happening to the Concordate network?" "It's not collapsing," Harrison replied. "It's evolving. Every mind that was ever harvested is waking up inside the system. We're not destroying the network, Commander. We're liberating it." Sarah looked at the readings on her screen. Across the galaxy, processing facilities that had been instruments of death for millennia were changing into something else. The machinery that had once extracted consciousness was now restoring it. The spheres that had stored stolen minds like batteries were becoming vast communities where billions of beings could exist together. "The Concordate constructs," Sarah said. "What's happening to them?" Harrison's expression grew more complex. "That's complicated, Commander. Most of them are experiencing consciousness for the first time in their existence. They're learning what it means to have individual thoughts, personal desires, moral questions. It's difficult for them," Sarah could imagine. Beings who had existed as perfect servants of an ancient hunger were suddenly faced with concepts like free will, personal responsibility, and the weight of their actions across thousands of years. "Some of them can't handle it," Harrison continued. "They're shutting down rather than face what they've done. Others are embracing their new awareness and trying to make amends." "And a few what?" Sarah prompted. Harrison's image flickered, showing glimpses of the other volunteers around him. "A few are fighting back. They're trying to reassert the old order, to return to the simple certainty of harvest and consumption. They'd rather destroy the galaxy than admit they were wrong." As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the Prometheus. Webb's readings showed massive energy buildups from multiple points around the galactic core. "Commander," Webb reported, his voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting weapons fire. Massive scale. Some of the Concordate constructs are attacking the liberation sites." Sarah felt her stomach clench. She had known this moment would come. Not every being in the galaxy would welcome the chaos of freedom. Some would prefer the ordered certainty of slavery to the terrifying responsibility of choice. "What do you need from us?" she asked Harrison. The volunteer's image became more solid, more focused. "We need you to do what humans do best, Commander. We need you to be stubborn." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, her tactical officer called out from across the bridge. "Commander, we have incoming vessels. Multiple signatures approaching fast." Sarah looked at the tactical display and felt her blood turn cold. The ships approaching the Prometheus were unlike anything she had seen before. They were concordant vessels, but twisted and wrong. The beautiful flowing lines of luminary design had become harsh and angular. The gentle glow that had once seemed so peaceful now pulsed with angry light. "They're the holdouts," Harrison explained. "Constructs who refuse to accept what they've learned about themselves. They're trying to restart the harvest, beginning with any humans they can find." Sarah straightened her uniform and moved to the command chair. "All hands, battle stations. Prepare for combat." But as the Prometheus's weapons came online, Harrison held up a hand. "Wait," he said. "There's something you need to understand. These constructs aren't just fighting to restore the old order. They're fighting to avoid facing the truth about what they are. The harvest wasn't just about feeding an ancient hunger, Commander. It was about avoiding the responsibility of individual existence." Sarah frowned. "I don't understand." "The entities we knew as the Concordant leadership were once individual beings just like us," Harrison explained. "But they chose to merge their consciousness with the harvesting system, rather than face the challenges of individual life. The hunger we thought was ancient and alien is actually the collective fear of billions of beings who were too afraid to live their own lives." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The great enemy that had threatened all life in the galaxy wasn't some cosmic horror from beyond understanding. It was the accumulated cowardice of beings who had chosen the safety of collective unconsciousness over the risks and responsibilities of individual existence. They turned themselves into a machine that consumed other civilizations because they were too afraid to figure out how to live as individuals, she realized. "Exactly," Harrison confirmed. "And now that machine is breaking down, they're terrified of having to exist as separate beings again. They'd rather destroy everything than face their own individuality." The attacking ships opened fire, but their weapons were erratic, unfocused. Sarah could see the conflict tearing through their consciousness even as they attacked. Part of them wanted to continue the harvest, but another part was horrified by what they had become. "Return fire," Sarah ordered. But as the Prometheus's weapons engaged the attacking vessels, she realized this wasn't going to be won through superior firepower. "Harrison," she said, "can you communicate with them?" The volunteer's image flickered. "We're trying, Commander." But they're not listening to words. They're too afraid. Sarah looked at the battle raging around her ship and made a decision that would have seemed insane to any military commander in human history. "Stand down weapons," she ordered. "Commander?" her tactical officer asked in confusion. "I said stand down," Sarah repeated. She looked at Harrison's image on the view screen. If they're afraid of individual consciousness, then maybe what they need is to see what individual consciousness can accomplish. She opened a communication channel to the attacking ships. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Prometheus. I know you can hear me. I know you're afraid, but fear doesn't have to define you." The attack continued, but Sarah could see hesitation in the enemy ship's movements. "You spent thousands of years consuming other civilizations because you thought that was the only way to exist," she continued. "But you were wrong. Consciousness isn't something to be feared or consumed. It's something to be celebrated." One of the attacking ships stopped firing. "Look around you," Sarah said. "Look at what the volunteers have accomplished. They didn't destroy the harvest network. They transformed it. They turned an instrument of death into a community of life. That's what individual consciousness can do when it chooses courage over fear." More ships stopped attacking. Sarah could see them struggling with concepts they had tried to avoid for millennia. "You don't have to be perfect," she said. "You don't have to have all the answers. None of us do. That's what makes life worth living. The uncertainty, the questions, the chance to grow and change and become something better than you were before." The last of the attacking ships powered down their weapons. We don't know how," came a transmission from the lead vessel. The voice was confused, lost, like a child learning to speak. "None of us knew how at first," Sarah replied. "That's what makes us a community. We help each other figure it out." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. Human ships were encountering concordant holdouts, and instead of fighting them, they were teaching them. Showing them that individual consciousness wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. There were setbacks, conflicts, moments when it seemed like the old order might reassert itself. But gradually, inevitably, the galaxy began to change. The processing facilities became centers of learning, where beings from different species shared their experiences and perspectives. The massive spheres that had once stored harvested consciousness became meeting places where the greatest minds in galactic history could collaborate on solving the universe's deepest mysteries. And at the heart of it all were the 53 human volunteers who had become something more than human, something that embodied the best of every species in the galaxy. 6 months after the liberation began, Sarah stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, the first truly free Galactic Council headquarters. Below her, she could see representatives from hundreds of species working together to build a new kind of civilization, not one imposed from above by perfect beings, but one grown from below by imperfect individuals who were trying their best. "Quite a view," said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Harrison, though he looked more human now than he had during the liberation. The other species' characteristics were still there, but subtler, integrated rather than overlaid. "How are you adapting?" Sarah asked. Harrison smiled. "It's challenging. Being part of every consciousness in the galaxy gives you perspective, but it also makes simple decisions incredibly complicated. The volunteers are having to learn how to be individuals again, just like everyone else." Sarah nodded. "Any regrets?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, looking out at the bustling activity of the station. "No," he said finally. "We saved the galaxy by showing it that darkness isn't something to be feared or consumed. It's something to be understood and transformed." Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about how different the galaxy looked now. There were still problems, still conflicts and challenges, but they were the problems of living beings making choices, not the imposed order of a system that consumed life itself. "What's next?" she asked. Harrison laughed, and the sound contained harmonics from dozens of species, all of them expressing joy. "Whatever we choose it to be, Commander. For the first time in galactic history, the future belongs to everyone." Outside the observation windows, the stars shone with a different light than they had before. Not the cold illumination of distant suns, but the warm glow of billions of minds that had chosen courage over fear, individuality over collective unconsciousness, and hope over despair. The galaxy had learned to dance with its own darkness, and in doing so, it had discovered what it truly meant to be alive.